Y'all, welcome and welcome back to my channel. My name is Taya and this is Taya's Turning Pages. So as you can see by the title of today's video, I am going to go over some book recommendations that I have for you guys as it pertains to Black books, Black authors, and just centering Black stories in general, because it is what? Black History Month. Now, of course, I do just want to say, even though it is Black History Month, it doesn't mean that you should only read books written by Black authors that center Black stories during this month. But during the month of February, it does not hurt to prioritize these books. Now, jumping into the recommendations, all of the books that I have to share with you today are books that I have read. I might film a part 2 to this video where I include books that I haven't read as well as other books that I have read and just do a good mix. But like I said, for this video, these are going to be books that I have read. And the first genre that I'm going to start out with is thrillers, and the first thriller that I have here is The Wife Before by Shanora Williams. So I was actually supposed to include this book in a reading vlog. This is a popcorn thriller. It is highly entertaining and it follows a very messy relationship. The story follows two characters named Samira and Roland. Samira is, I think, in her mid to late 20s, and she's trying to really figure out the next phase of her life, and she's working this job that she really can't stand until she gets fired. But she ends up bouncing back a little bit because she's able to secure this waitressing job for one night at this fancy party. Once she gets to the house where this party is being held and she starts serving drinks, she ends up meeting this man named Roland. Hit it off very quickly and they end up in this whirlwind romance to the point where they actually end up getting engaged and getting married. So now Samira's whole life has changed in the matter of like a couple of months, and she moves in with Roland at his huge mansion slash estate. But while Samira starts to get acclimated to being a wife as well as just living in this house, she ends up stumbling across this shed that is on the property. And once Samira enters this shed, she notices that all of Roland's ex-wife's belongings are still packed away in this shed, and Roland's ex-wife ended up dying in a mysterious way, which Samira knows about. She ends up looking through his ex-wife's belongings and she comes across these journal entries, incriminating entries about Roland. Now this puts Samira on high alert and she's very suspicious of Roland and now their marriage. We follow Samira throughout the story of her trying to get to the bottom of what really happened to Roland's ex-wife, and also who is the man that she actually married. I remember when I read this, I could not put this book down, and I actually ended up finishing it in one day. Any last thriller that I have to share is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This is another book that I have not talked about on my channel because this was also supposed to be featured in that same reading vlog with The Wife Before, but I'm here to talk about it today and I'm here to recommend it today because despite some of the critiques that this book has gotten, I still think that this is a solid thriller with a solid plot, and it's definitely a little bit different than I feel like what we're used to seeing in the thriller genre. So this story follows two characters named Sydney and Theo, but it more specifically follows Sydney. She has lived in her neighborhood pretty much her entire life. Her neighbors know her, she knows them, and it's just very tight-knit and very close until she starts to notice for sale signs going up in the yard of a lot of her neighbors' houses, and these same neighbors are disappearing virtually overnight. They essentially left without saying goodbye or really letting anybody know where they're moving to next, and Sydney finds this very strange. And so Sydney starts to get suspicious. She starts to wondering if there's something bigger going on here. And so you follow Sydney as well as Theo throughout the story of them trying to get to the bottom of what's really going on in their neighborhood and why their neighbors are virtually disappearing overnight. So I don't want to say too much else. I feel like this is one of those books that you really should just kind of jump into it, not knowing too much, but at least having some of that background. Now, while this wasn't one of my favorite thrillers that I've ever read, I definitely saw Alyssa Cole's vision for this book. I did appreciate the larger message that it had to tell. I will say that this is a bit more of a slow burn thriller, so just keep that in mind because I know a lot of people don't really care for slow burn thrillers. I myself am very picky with slow burn thrillers, but that didn't take away from my enjoyment of this book. And the last book that I have here in this genre is Nightcrawling by Layla Motley. As devastating and heartbreaking and infuriating as it was, this is truly one of the most urgent novels that I think everybody should read. This actually, to me, should be included in some curriculums, if we're being honest here. I know we have a lot of book bans going on, and I'm sure this book would make that list. I genuinely feel as though this book can be served in so many different academic settings just because of how Layla Motley explored the topics of exploitation and just the adultification of Black girls, and also just the exploration of race and poverty and class in this book. There are so many conversations that could be had and so many layers that you could peel back in this book that we could be here all day. And I actually read this back in February of 2023, so last Black History Month, and I'm so glad that I did because this got under my skin in so many ways that other books haven't. This story follows a young Black girl named Kiara who lives in Oakland, California with her brother. Unfortunately, Kiara and her brother are on their own. Their father is, I'm pretty sure, in jail, while their mother is, I think, in a halfway house trying to turn her life around and to also work through her addiction. But because Kiara and her brother Marcus, I forgot to say his name, because Kiara and her brother Marcus are on their own, they are fending for themselves, themselves and they're trying to make ends meet. I forget how old Kiara is in the story. She is a teenager and she is technically a high school student, whereas Marcus is her older brother. Marcus is an aspiring rapper. He really only cares about becoming a rapper. He has no intention of working another job to try to make ends meet, and he dropped out of school. So he really is only focused on becoming a rapper and trying to become a successful big time rapper. So he's always in the studio and he's always recording and just trying to, you know, make it big. Whereas Kiara, on the other hand, is trying to attend school and she is trying to finish. Because Marcus refuses to work, Kiara has no choice but to drop out of school and to try to find a job, because they are pretty much on the verge of getting evicted from their apartment. And so Kiara isn't having any luck finding a job because she is a high school dropout and because she is still pretty young. So Kiara ends up turning to the streets and becomes a sex worker, aka night crawling. And so you follow Kiara throughout the story of her navigating the streets and trying to just survive in a world that is not kind to her at all. And also, while Kiara is trying to navigate this new reality, she's also thrown into the middle of this massive police investigation slash scandal that exposes her as a key witness. So on top of everything that she's already dealing with, she also has some people in the police department that are on her head, essentially. And the story takes off from there. There are other storylines and plot points as it pertains to other characters, but like I said, the focus really is on Kiara. Layla Motley does not hold back, and she really goes there when it comes to exploring these topics and really shining a light on how these different types of societal elements affect Black girls and Black women. I remember when I read this story, my heart kept breaking for Kiara. If it wasn't one thing, it was another. I can't recommend this novel enough. And Layla Motley is actually the youngest author to, I think, be nominated for the Booker Prize Award, which is a huge accomplishment within the publishing and literary space. So definitely make sure y'all pick this book up and give it a read, because you can just learn so much through this book. And now we're finally moving on to the romance genre, and these books are by two of my all-time favorite authors. So we're going to start with one of them, and this person is no other than Kennedy Ryan. First book that I have to share with you is Hookshot. I'm really happy to talk about this book again. This is one of the best books that Kennedy Ryan has ever written, and it is one of the most romantic books that she has ever written. I just think that because it's Black History Month, but also because Valentine's Day takes place in February / Black History Month, this is the perfect book, I think, to read during that time, or at least maybe on that day. So this is the third and final book in the Hoop series by Kennedy Ryan. And just real quick, for those of you who do not know, the Hoop series is a sports romance series that follows the world of the NBA, as well as NBA players and their sports agents. And so this story specifically follows Keenan, who is an NBA star, and his love interest named Lotus, who is an aspiring fashion designer. Now, even though this is the third and final book in the Hoop series, that does not mean that you have to read the books in order, nor do you have to read the other two in the series. These can technically be read as standalones, but to me, I think it is more fun to read this as a series. So going back to what I was saying, the story follows Keenan and Lotus, and Keenan is an NBA player, but he is looking to retire because he is getting a bit older and he really wants to start spending more time with his family, specifically his daughter. So Keenan was married to his daughter's mother once upon a time ago, but they did end up getting divorced, and it was a very nasty divorce. So they do not get along, but they do co-parent very well. So because Keenan is just so focused on really taking care of his daughter and trying to be the best father that he can be, he hasn't really thought about a relationship or really looking for love until his love interest Lotus comes into the picture. And Keenan and Lotus do know of each other because Keenan is actually teammates with Lotus's cousin's boyfriend, which is August, and August is the main character in the first book in the series, Longshot. They do know of each other and they have met each other before, but they never really spoke to each other. And so Lotus is an aspiring fashion designer living in New York City. So fast forward years later, Keenan and Lotus both attend this party one night and they end up running into each other. And because Keenan remembers this instant attraction that he had towards Lotus, he decides to actually kind of, you know, pursue her a bit. Lotus is very closed off to the idea. She doesn't really want to get involved in any relationships or any situationships with anyone, but she can't deny her attraction to Keenan. And so you follow these two throughout the story of them getting to know each other, and Keenan lowering his guard down and putting his reservations about finding love and starting a relationship to the side. He does court Lotus throughout pretty much this entire story. Now that was a lot. I really had to lay the land and really give you guys the foundation and the setup for this story because I need you to pick it up, like duh. But like I already mentioned, this book is to me the most romantic out of the series because of the fact that Keenan is courting Lotus throughout the majority of the story. The writing here is so romantic and so beautiful and just so like intimate and tender, and I loved every single bit of it because we still don't have as many romance stories, in my opinion, that are written by Black authors that center Black characters and have them falling in love in a very healthy and romantic and positive way. And I just felt like this book was such a breath of fresh air, especially because Keenan really amps up the romance factor and he sends Lotus poems, he sends her flowers, he sends her romantic text, and it just made my heart swoon. I definitely recommend giving this a read, but please make sure you look up the trigger warnings. Just because this book is very romantic, that does not mean that this doesn't have Kennedy Ryan's signature style, including very serious and important topics. And then the second Kennedy Ryan book that I have here is Before I Let Go. So I have not talked about Before I Let Go in a very long time. I read this book when it first debuted, and I have a reading vlog up on my channel about this book, so I will leave that linked up above in the cards just in case you want to check that out. I fell in love with this book when I read it. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I'm not sure if you can tell because again my lighting is a mess, but I tabbed this book up. Like I went to town on this book, y'all. Again, this is There you go. Hopefully you can kind of see it better now. I went to town on annotating this book and I have no regrets because this book truly altered my brain chemistry and it became one of my favorite books of 2022. It seems like across the board, readers everywhere loved this book and continues to praise this book. I do think that this is the book that really put Kennedy Ryan on the map for so many people. And I love to see it because this is another book that centers Black love and Black characters, and that just makes me so happy that this really hit the mainstream the way that it did. The story follows two characters named Yasmin and Josiah, and I'm pretty sure Yasmin and Josiah were either high school or college sweethearts and they ended up getting married, but unfortunately they do get divorced. I'm not going to spoil why they got divorced, but just know that something tragic happened in their lives that essentially forced them to kind of check out of their relationship. So now fast forward, I think they've been divorced for about a year and some change, and you pretty much just follow them throughout the story, them trying to navigate this new normal as well as trying to co-parent their kids. But as time goes on, Yasmin and Josiah start to find themselves kind of thrown into situations together where they are forced to reckon with their past, and these reckoning of sorts do lead them down this road of them potentially reconciling and having a second chance romance. I definitely recommend picking up this book and giving it a read if you still haven't read Before I Let Go yet. And of course, shameless plug, checking out my reading vlog. There are spoilers in that reading vlog, so make sure you read this book first if you don't want to get spoiled for anything. Even though I don't talk about this book as much as I once did, that doesn't mean that my obsession and my love for it has faltered or wavered. Not at all. I think what Kennedy Ryan did with this book was so beautiful and so needed, especially because there are discussions surrounding mental health as well as depression, therapy, and how all of those factors impact the Black community. Any last books that I have here are all books by the same author. They are by Beverly Jenkins, and the books are Always and Forever, Through the Storm, and Rebel. Always and Forever follows Grace and Blake, and Grace is a very strong-willed, opinionated, and just tell you like it is woman, and one of her cousins ends up writing her and tells her that him as well as a few other men decided to kind of start their own town slash colony, because remember, these stories take place in the 1800s, so they started their own town slash colony and they're essentially looking for wives. And so he writes Grace and asks her, does she know of any women that are interested in moving to this new town and hopefully marrying and settling down? So Grace decides to see if any women in her town are interested in doing this. She does get a lot of responses from women in the town telling her that they are interested, but the issue is that because there are so many women that do want to move to this town, they really have no way of traveling there. And so Blake ends up in Grace's town because he is traveling, and he just decides to kind of like make a pit stop in her town. Long story short, Blake ends up agreeing to helping Grace and these women travel. So you follow Grace and Blake as well as these women, but more specifically Grace and Blake throughout the story of them trying to put their differences aside and getting to know one another, and they start to realize that the other isn't as bad as they originally thought, and the story takes off from there. So the reason why I'm recommending this book, besides the fact that this is a beautiful romance story and Beverly Jenkins did her big one with this book, I think that this book does a great job at really showcasing the history of Black travel in this country and just how the Reconstruction era after the Civil War really impacted the way in which Black people were able to move throughout this country. And I'm not gonna lie to y'all, I was pissed when I was reading some of these chapters because the lengths that Blake, Grace, and these women have to go through in order to make it to this town is insane. It's really unfortunate that they couldn't even take a train to make it to this town because of the Jim Crow laws that were starting to be implemented and passed throughout the country, but more specifically the South. There was a lot of talk about Grace and Blake trying to figure out if they could actually get on these trains, and they figured that they could, but there was a real possibility that they could be kicked off of these trains at any point. And so that means that they could have been stranded anywhere, like on the side of the road, in the woods, or even worse, in a sundown town. Or they could have been forced to sit in the very back of the train with like all of the animals and livestock that were traveling as well for the duration of their trip. And these trips, you know, took like days or even weeks. So they had no choice but to travel by wagon. And the way in which Beverly Jenkins describes this journey sounds like hell. I think she does a really good job at exploring that piece of history and really making it pack a punch. I feel like it also provides a foundation and plants a seed for how the Green Book came to be. And I'll be sure to leave an article and some sources down below that speaks more to the Green Book, just in case you're interested in learning more about it. Now moving on to the last books here, Through the Storm and Rebel. So starting with Through the Storm, this is actually my favorite Beverly Jenkins book to date. So this story follows Raymond and Sable. Sable was actually enslaved, but she ended up escaping and ends up at this refugee camp for other former enslaved folks. And this is how she meets Raymond, because Raymond is a Union major and he's one of the soldiers that oversees this refugee camp. And throughout this span of time that Raymond and Sable spend at this camp, they start to get to know one another and sparks start flying. But before they're able to really act on anything, the refugee camp is under attack and Raymond and Sable are both split up. Sable is trying to find safety. And so long story short, one thing leads to another, where Sable ends up leaving. She leaves without telling Raymond goodbye, and she also betrays him in the process. But she really was backed up into a corner and had no choice to do what she did. Time passes and Sable finds herself in New Orleans, which is the city that Raymond and his family family the Levesque family is from. And so Sable is looking for a job. Unbeknownst to her, Raymond's mother actually offers Sable a job. Raymond's family is very wealthy. So Sable accepts the job, and so of course her and Raymond end up back in each other's lives. But Raymond is still very angry with Sable, and he still feels betrayed by her, so he wants nothing to do with her. He doesn't want to talk to her, and Sable really can't get him to talk to her until Raymond's mother tells Raymond that in order for him to get his inheritance, he has to marry someone, and she wants him to marry Sable. And the story takes off from there. So similar to Always and Forever, there's a lot going on with this plot. It is absolutely worth it because this story really takes you on a journey. I really love the way that Beverly Jenkins set up the story and crafted it, because you are getting to know Raymond and Sable at the same time they're getting to know each other. So it really feels like you guys are all in this together, and they feel so real. Raymond and Sable's character development is some of the best character development that I have ever read in a story. The male main character in this book is actually a part of the Levesque family. He is Raymond's brother. This story follows Belinda and Drake, and Belinda is from the north, but she ends up moving down to the south so that way she can teach the kids and the adults that were formerly enslaved. But she ends up finding a building that becomes the schoolhouse in which she is going to teach it. The schoolhouse is vandalized, and Belinda is actually there while the school is getting destroyed. And the people that are destroying the school decide to go after her, and she ends up running for her life, and Drake notices, and so he ends up getting her to safety. And from that moment on, Belinda and Drake get to know each other, sparks start to fly, but before they can really start to even act on those feelings, Belinda gets a message from her father that he expects her to marry someone that he deems suitable. But Belinda is not happy about that because she obviously has these feelings for Drake. Drake has these feelings for her, and the story takes off from there. So I definitely think that these books are great options to read during this month. There are so many different tidbits and pieces of information that I didn't even know. All right, y'all, and those are all the books that I had to recommend today. Like I mentioned earlier, I might film a part 2 to this video where I include books that I haven't read yet, but I have in my TBR and I just want to share with you, as well as books that I did read that I didn't include in this video. I will also leave a playlist of my past Black History Month book recs in the cards, so definitely make sure you check those out. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me and my channel out. And lastly, please make sure you follow me on Bookstagram as well as Storygraph. I'll leave all of that information linked down below, as well as at the end of the video like I always do. I will see you guys in my next video.